So you're all very welcome to this Law Society Practice Information session, Technology, AI and the Future of Ethics for Lawyers. It's a privilege to be joined today by Jennifer O'Sullivan, member of the Guidance and Ethics Committee of the Law Society of Ireland. She's founder of Law Hero, which we just had a little chat about. She's legal counsel for Volkswagen Group and Financial Services Ireland, and she's a member of the in-house committee and Guidance and Ethics Committee. So you're very welcome, Jennifer. And everybody on your call, you're very welcome. We'll take questions on the chat probably at the end because we've a lot to get through. So over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the introduction, Justin, and hi to everybody watching online. I appreciate you joining us on your lunchtime on this Wednesday afternoon. So we're going to cut straight into it because we only have 25 minutes and I know this is just a really interesting topic for everybody. So the first thing I really wanted to do before we dive into this topic is kind of get a sense check from the room as to your knowledge or use of ChatGPT in particular. So there's a barcode or a QR code on the screen right now. You just take out your mobile phone and you scan it and you just answer the poll, which I'm going to bring up right now. So can everybody see the poll?
I can, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting as to people's honesty around using ChatGPT in the workplace, but of course using ChatGPT in legal practice is even more dangerous, as we'll find out later on. Okay, so yes, 13%, no, 88%. That seems like a landslide to me, Justin. Oh wait, the odds are changing. But they're still not in the majority, and that's exactly what I expected. Even though this is anonymous, I was sure we were going to have a lot of no's. Okay, so thanks everybody for participating in that, and that gives me a clear indication of what I'm dealing with. Okay, so back to the presentation. Okay, so you may all remember where you were in January when you first heard about ChatGPT. I remember I was in a bar in Dublin and I spent probably the next 6 hours playing with it and tinkering with it because I found it absolutely fascinating in terms of what it was able to do. And just taking a step back, so ChatGPT is a type of open AI, so open artificial intelligence, and it uses a type of technology called generative pre-trained transformer, which simply means it's a question and answer setup, a little bit like Google. And how it works is it actually uses natural language processing. So right now, when you're listening to me talk, because you've been on this planet for such a long time, and because you're so used to listening to people speaking, you'll be able to guess in a natural flow of what I'm saying, what the next word is. We have an amazing ability to assume the natural process of a sentence. And this is a shortcut that we use to conserve our energy. Otherwise, the whole time we'd have to listen intently to every single word people said. But this is actually what ChatGPT does. It listens intently and it observes intently to everything we're doing. And it gets its information from feeding into it. So there's a term in technology called garbage in, garbage out. So the more useful, practical, real life questions we ask ChatGPT, the more intelligent it becomes, and hence the words artificial intelligence. So when any new technology comes, lawyers are always the first ones to go, oh, I'm not going to be replaced by a robot, or and then behind closed doors, people start asking each other, do you think the robots are going to take my job? And people start reading up on it, trying to find a way to outsmart the robots. And, you know, everybody starts thinking of ways to get ahead. And I suppose from my perspective and from everything I've read, and I'm a big fan of Richard Susskind, for example, from my opinion, I think any of these AI tools will become a trusted companion rather than a replacement of human expertise. And interestingly enough, Mason, Hayes and Curran this year did a survey of lawyers, and they also found that most people's perception of AI tools in legal services will be a tool rather than a replacement of human expertise. So I just want to say another few things as well around ChatGPT. It ingests billions upon billions of words a day. So January 2023 was when it came to prominence here in Europe. Obviously, it's been made long before that. But if you can imagine that every single day that ChatGPT lives, it's becoming more and more aware of the planet. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so we're here because of the law and ethics, and it would be completely remiss of me if I didn't mention to all of you the very famous recent case of Mata v Avianica Airlines that's been doing the rounds on LinkedIn, and it's being used as an example of, oh, we can't trust ChatGPT. But I just wanted to go over some of the facts of the case. It's quite interesting. It was just a bread and butter personal injury case. A man got knocked over in Kennedy International. He wanted to sue the airline. Very, very normal stuff. And the kicker came when the plaintiff's lawyer actually used ChatGPT looking for case law. So this is quite interesting because, as we know, ChatGPT learns on the job. It doesn't have any knowledge without our input. So, for example, in this case, if there was no personal injury case law in ChatGPT's memory, it's going to make it up. And that's exactly what happened here. Now, interestingly enough, and as I said earlier, ChatGPT runs off a natural language processor. So ChatGPT found in its memory something that was similar to these cases and actually made up names, made up facts in order to satisfy the user's question. So, you know, it's a very obedient tool, albeit incorrect. And I put some of the quotes from the affidavit from the lawyer who used ChatGPT, and he said, a source that revealed itself to be unreliable, and he was aware that the content could be false. And in his defense, he actually showed some of the chat he used, which is Varghese a real case? And ChatGPT said, yes, it is a real case. So the first ethical consideration when it comes to ChatGPT is it has a big problem with provenance, which is the origin of sources. It does not have a reliable source checker, which is something all of us need to be very aware of when we're citing case law, or even if we use this tool in litigation. So following on from this, and I just wanted to touch on this to give our talk a little bit of context. We're not the only ones who are being faced with AI as a tool. Most of you will have touch points with education, whether you have kids in university at the moment or doing the Leaving Cert. There's going to be a big problem with plagiarism, for example, and universities in Ireland at the moment are grappling with trying to draft policies. How do you mark students down? Do you do it on a proportionate basis? Do you give them a straight fail for using ChatGPT in the first place? Is it even disallowed? Is it plagiarism? All these questions need to be answered by educators. Some people are worried that it will render some areas redundant. I would tend to agree with that, but I wouldn't see it as a bad thing. Certain tasks definitely can be automated through AI. In the legal profession, an easy win would be research or summarizing case law, or, you know, things like that that are fairly mundane. Some of you may have used Kira, which is an AI tool that's used in big law firms for large-scale mergers and acquisitions. There's also AI used in discovery. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. There are some use cases where it is very useful. And then I suppose when we move into the question of unethical, we start to talk about a duty of care, not only from solicitors, but from other service providers. Is there human oversight? And when I talk about military use in a second, you'll see why that's important. And then some of the other things we think about when it comes to using third-party tools like cybersecurity, GDPR, and one that's happening at the moment is fair use policy when it comes to employees using technology in the workplace. More than likely, ChatGPT will come under a fair use policy. I just wanted to mention military use because I have a personal interest in war and public international law. And I actually stole this from Barry Scannell, who's probably the most vocal person on LinkedIn and in Ireland when it comes to AI law. But he just mentioned about some of the AI capability of drones and drones that can destroy buildings that are given a certain instruction. But of course, the drone doesn't care if there's people in the building. All it wants to do is destroy what it was set out to destroy. And this is the problem we have with AI. Law is never black and white. There's always going to be a gray area. And this gray area is where moral and ethical concerns come in that arguably only human beings are able to kind of produce as beings who have been, experience different situations in their lives. For example, litigation would be one where people would, for example, know judges, know different courts, understand kind of different local dynamics. That would be a thing that AI would have trouble grappling with. And then other patterns outside of black and white, this is something for sure that AI doesn't have yet. And that's why I said at the start that lawyers will not be replaced by AI because AI lacks this gray area capability. So when it comes to solicitors, we always hark back to our trusted companion, which is the Solicitor's Guide to Professional Conduct. As you all know, it was reissued this year by my colleagues in Guidance and Ethics Committee, of which I'm a member. And I thought I would pull out kind of two references, which I think are quite relevant to a solicitor's use of ChatGPT or Google Bard in the workplace. So obviously confidentiality would be the first place you would think of when it comes to professional conduct. But I thought that this first quote was actually quite relevant because what it says is that IT maintenance contractors and others, and when it comes to like that third party element, the solicitor should ensure that the appropriate industry standard agreements are in place with the provider and that those agreements are in compliance with GDPR. And disclosure should be limited to what is necessary. So for me, this quote has two parts. It has adherence with GDPR and, technical and security measures under Article 30 of GDPR. And then disclosure to me would be confidentiality, breach of client confidentiality. The thing with ChatGPT is most people who are experts in GDPR say that ChatGPT is not GDPR compliant. And this is because we have no idea what they are doing with that data. We have no idea. They have no transparency at all around what they're doing with that idea. So if you have employees in the workplace going, I have a personal injury case in Limerick next week, I wonder what the judge will say. I mean, that's going to be a big breach of confidentiality and a personal data breach, if you look at it like that. And then the second quote is kind of backs up what the first one says. And it also says is recommend that firm owners should ensure an appropriate level of security, both physical and cyber, to mitigate the risk of loss to clients' monies and assets. So the guide is very, very clear that although it doesn't say you may not use ChatGPT in the workplace, there are sufficient guidelines and standards there around GDPR and confidentiality that you have to adhere to. Okay, this is the last little bit of legalese I'm going to hit you all with. So if any of you are kind of nerds like me and have been following the draft Artificial Intelligence Act, again, I would say for me, the person I look to the most is Barry Scannell and William Fry. He to me is the best at disseminating information around this proposal. But I think it's quite interesting that in the last few weeks, some of the prohibited practices that were in the proposal at the very start of its drafting have now been removed. And you'll see the ones I've crossed out, which is predictive polling, emotion recognition, and scraping the internet for scraping for CCTV or social media. I think that's really interesting that the Commission, the Parliament, they've removed those. And I think what's also very interesting is that the real-time biometric data AI now has caveats. And this is because, of course, local police agencies and courts want the ability to protect victims, to prevent crime, and they also want to have a certain level of autonomy from a member state perspective. Because remember, in the EU, criminal law is a member state mandate rather than an EU mandate. So you will have certain jurisdictions in the EU who have a much more heavy-handed approach towards crime and crime prevention than we do. But then again, we may also go in that direction. So I find that very, very interesting. I also find very, very interesting that emotion recognition is not considered a prohibited practice anymore. Now, some people argue that the manipulation or deceptive techniques part will cover emotional recognition, but I reckon that was taken out for a reason. And it's not to be, scaremongering, but I think if you're any crime detection agency or you're some kind of, Interpol, the more AI capability you have, the better. And of course, you can always say it's for the greater good, it's for the good of citizens, it's for crime prevention. But I would ask, is it necessary? Is it proportionate? This is always the yardsticks we have to measure law by. And I just find it interesting that that's the way the law is moving towards. They've gotten a lot more allowances now than they did at the start. Anyway, on that note, that is my nutshell. I really want to have some chat with whoever's on the call. If anybody has questions or wants to talk about it, I left sufficient time, I hope, to do that.
So thanks very much, Jennifer. If anyone would like to ask a chat, we'll raise a hand, or we'll allow you to speak if you wish, or ask it on the chat. I suppose from my own perspective is that there's huge opportunities in AI for legal firms around maybe removing some of the more repetitive tasks at heart. And one of the ones that comes to mind is the chatbot and service tools that are being developed at the moment. And there are some queries or questions around cybersecurity, data protection, GDPR, and then if the bot itself answers incorrectly. So there's kind of three questions in there. What's your view on GDPR, the current legislation, and the bot itself giving incorrect information? Who's liable?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was thinking about this, I thought to myself, people are always going to prefer human interaction, especially if it's something, urgent, or like, for example, changing a flight. Everybody wants to ring up and talk to somebody on the phone. People are quite reluctant. So actually, what I have found in my own practices, the uptake on chatbots isn't great, first of all. So if they're not being utilized, as I said with ChatGPT, they're not becoming more intelligent. So that's the first thing. They're only as good as the input. Your second question around the law, yes, chatbots are subject to privacy laws, GDPR, cookies as well. If there's cookie and caching going on, they'll be subject to that. They're also subject to cybersecurity because of potential data breaches. Like, for example, if you are on a chatbot with an insurance company and you're putting in all your personal details, your personal data, your name, address, PPS number, all of that, of course, it becomes a cesspit when it comes to personal data because you're inputting all of that. And then I would say the final bit when it comes to chatbots and who's liable, and I was thinking about this as well, you're always going to have a third-party provider who supplies you the license for the chatbot. So I was talking to a colleague yesterday around the provisions of those licenses. You're starting to see AI and kind of liability around AI coming into your IPIT clauses. And people, we haven't had that before, that's new. But I was also reminded that AI is also covered by GDPR already, a little bit, not as much as the AI regulation will, but there is fairly substantial law there at the moment for those kind of things.
Okay, just referring to that one about how up to date is AI, or can we trust AI? I suppose there's two questions there, but how up to date is AI?
Yeah, well, I suppose when it comes to technology, like if you think of email, if you think of cloud computing, that kind of thing, you have to trust the providers. And we've seen, for example, with the massive data breach that Meta has had, like if you think of when people started using Facebook back in 2009, 2010, they have about 20 years of transferring personal data without a legitimate basis in GDPR. So I think from a legal perspective, there are so many holes in the bucket, and it'll take fines and it'll take people suing these companies for them to bring up their compliance. But in terms of trust, I would say that as a people, we have extreme trust when it comes to technology. People have no problem sharing information on their phone, like Samsung and Android. I don't want to get into the whole debate between Android and iPhone, but like everybody knows that data is being used. Everybody knows the data on TikTok is being used in a manipulative sense. So the unethical question is there, but it doesn't stop people using it. So I think if somebody's, for example, financial details were made public, that might be a reason for somebody to become irate. But most people seem to be fairly comfortable that their life story is online or in a cloud somewhere. I think it's just how we've moved, especially it's been since COVID, it's moved that way.
So maybe just turning a little bit to like the small practitioner or the practitioner themselves and the use of AI, and what should they be thinking about in their offices as to how they use it. And I know somebody's just put something up there on the chat around that the basically the information they get from the AI is an opportunity to get them to call in to your office for more detailed discussion. But do you have any views on how small or medium-sized practitioners or even larger firms, how they're using AI at the moment themselves, and what could they be doing more going into the future to sort of keep themselves up to date or up to speed? How do you see it happening, if that's not too broad a question?
Well, from my own perspective, the very first area it's being used in is contract management and litigation. They're kind of the easy wins. And those tools have been around for the last 10 years. They're not new. Obviously, today we're talking about ChatGPT, which is, as I said, it's a question answer kind of a thing. But the problem is the confidentiality. So I think were you to find, and there's thousands of solutions out there, a solution that satisfies cybersecurity law, satisfies GDPR, you're happy with the confidentiality agreement with the third-party provider, by all means start to use it, because the longer you leave it, the more behind you're going to be, and the less value you're going to be able to give your client at a lower price, because let's face it, things are very competitive and people want things done quicker. easy wins would be research, things that trainees currently do, research. I've heard people using, for example, Thomson Reuters Precedent Bank to make things like employment agreements, NDAs, kind of very bog standard, low risk. Now, employment agreement isn't low risk, an NDA is. Those kind of things can be done very, very well by AI. The high value stuff, leave that to the humans.
Yeah. So I missed the front part of that question, but do you think AI can replace initial conversations with clients? So
No.
pre-instructions.
No, I don't think so. Well, okay, it depends on the service you're offering. So say, for example, if it's probate, I mean, those, and if it's wills and those kind of things, those are very personal, intimate details that a lot of people would not be comfortable sharing with an AI tool for the moment. Like, who's to say that my generation won't be creating our own wills online via chatbot? It just depends on your level of comfort with technology, and that's also a generational question. So that's how I would approach it. But I would say for the generic commercial stuff, there's no need to have so many people there, because at the end of the day, the client's not going to pay for people when AI can do it quicker.
So then is it then just basically a fancy FAQ, like list of questions and answers? It's just a more real-time way of getting we know what the question is, or we know what the answers are, we can deliver, and we're just waiting for the right question to deliver that answer.
And that's exactly a really good point. And I predict that the skill will come from being able to ask the AI the right question. That's where the skill of the modern lawyer will come in. And like I've played around with ChatGPT myself. Like, I've asked it, how do you motivate the business to become more compliant? And it gave me a very generic answer that was not helpful. But of course, if I asked it something more specific, it would have been more helpful. But that's on me.
Yeah. So the more specific the query is now, the better the answer.
And as I said, yeah, that's why I said garbage in, garbage out.
And just we're running into the last couple of minutes here. So if anyone has any further questions, we'll just take them very quickly. But how do you see the future then? There's a regulatory environment that's probably going to change, but then the technology is also going to keep changing. So it looks like the regulatory is all the time trying to catch up with the AI, but the AI is probably ahead of the technology developments are ahead of us. So are we?
Yeah, I would say if you are currently using AI and it is not compliant, I think now's the time to start checking. If you're thinking of using it, I would say, for me, looking at risk, the highest risk is in automated decision making. And a lot of companies use automated decision making, especially when it comes to credit scores. In finance, that can be detrimental if you don't get a mortgage, if you don't get a car loan, those kind of things. You have to be able to explain the decision-making process. And that can only be done when you understand the technology yourself. So I would say my tips to, especially in-house counsel, I know it's not in-house counsel, but look at what you have, make sure it's compliant. And then if you're a small practitioner, or if you're in a law firm at the moment and you're looking to purchase AI, make sure you collaborate with your data protection manager, with your cybersecurity people. Make sure it's a collaborative purchasing of these tools, because at the end of the day, the lawyers can't do it all. You need to work with your business partners to get the right tool for you.
Just two last questions from me, but one is from somebody else. But could AI be used as a substitute for legal training or law exam study?
Yeah, so I've heard that the ChatGPT is able to pass the Watson-Glaser test, which is used to assess trainees. I've heard that it's able to pass certain bar exams. But at the end of the day, in order to practice law, you have to have, your practicing cert. So what good is it passing the exam if you can't become a professional? And you can only have privilege with a solicitor. You can't have privilege with technology. So that kind of thing to me is redundant, because what good is doing the exam if you can't practice the law? Yeah.
Very good. So any final tips for people going forward around just educating themselves more or finding out more? What do you think they should be doing?
As I said, I follow Barry Scannell on LinkedIn. That's where I get most of my information. He's really good. I would say become aware of AI tools. Don't be afraid of them. They're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. They're extremely helpful when it comes to contract management, litigation management, and discovery. We're already using them, so that's not a big deal. I would say when it comes to managing your workforce and their use of ChatGPT on the job, in order to protect yourself as an employer, put in a fair use policy, speak openly about these tools rather than in secret, because people are using them, but you have to talk about them in order to legitimize them. That's what I would say.
And just in the last kind of comment there was, if it's prone to hallucinations and lacks common sense, will it continue to be a risk going forward, even if the tech becomes more sophisticated?
I think it's like a baby, you know, so it's going to blubber at the start and go, blah, 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 I don't know. But once it starts to make sense of the world, and as I said, once what you're feeding it is more accurate and it becomes more sophisticated, then the quality is going to be very good. Any tech at the start is always going to be rubbish. Like, think of the first iPhones, how clunky and horrible they were. And now look what we have. They're absolutely fabulous. The exact same trajectory is going to happen with ChatGPT. We're in the early stages of development, so I wouldn't write it off.
Okay, and on that note, we're just out of time. Listen, Jennifer, thanks a million for joining us today. You've been a good sport. This is our last information session of the spring summer sessions. We'll be back on September the 6th. So enjoy your holidays, everybody. All of the previous sessions are available on the Law Society YouTube channel, which you can access via the Law Society website. If you have any queries around practice support, you can email me, j.purcell@lawsociety.ie, and we look forward to talking to you all again next September. Thanks, Jennifer, for being a good sport and joining us today, and everyone who joined the call. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.